Have you ever felt a place watching you, as if it knew your every thought, every secret, every fear? For Lucas and Mariana, their dream of finding the perfect home in the mountains quickly spiraled into a nightmare, a house that wouldn't let them leave. The couple's arrival is shrouded in unease. The long, winding road to the property is flanked by ancient, gnarled trees whose twisted branches seem to claw at the sky. The house, perched on the edge of a cliff, looks like something out of a storybook, a rustic cabin with wooden beams and ivy climbing its stone walls. But the air is unnervingly still, as if the forest itself is holding its breath. Lucas, a meticulous architect, is immediately drawn to the house's structure. "This place has character," he says, running his hand over the wooden doorframe. Mariana, however, feels a strange chill. She can't shake the feeling that the house is looking back at them, its dark windows like watchful eyes. Inside, the atmosphere shifts. The interior is immaculate yet oddly untouched, as if no one had lived there in decades. Dust hangs in the air, but the furniture is pristine, almost staged. As they unpack, the tension grows. The realtor had mentioned the house was isolated, but Lucas and Mariana hadn't expected the oppressive silence. There are no sounds of birds, no rustling of leaves, only the low, mournful howl of the wind through the cracks in the walls. That night, Mariana wakes up to a faint creaking noise, like footsteps on old wood. She nudges Lucas, who brushes it off as the house settling. The next morning, their unease deepens. Mariana notices the same painting hanging in every room, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway of what looks eerily similar to their house. Lucas jokes about it, but his voice lacks conviction. When Mariana steps outside to explore the property, the cold hits her like a slap, even though the sun shines brightly. She swears she hears faint whispers carried on the wind, but every time she turns around, there's nothing there. By the afternoon, the couple decides to venture into town. But the GPS malfunctions, the signal dropping entirely as they drive. Lucas tries to retrace their path, but every turn seems to lead back to the house. "We must have missed a turn," he mutters, frustration creeping into his voice. Mariana clutches her seatbelt, her anxiety growing with each passing mile. After what feels like hours of driving in circles, they find themselves once again parked in front of the house. That night, the creaking footsteps return, louder this time. Lucas gets up to investigate, his flashlight casting long, distorted shadows down the hallway. He calls out, "Hello? Is someone there?" But only the echo of his own voice responds. Mariana stays frozen in bed, her breath shallow, her ears straining to pick up any sound. Just as Lucas reaches the end of the hallway, a door creaks open behind him, one they hadn't noticed before. The scene ends with Lucas and Mariana standing in the doorway of the newly discovered room, their flashlight illuminating the strange, pulsing glow of something carved into the wooden floor. The couple's unease transforms into a suffocating dread as they realize the house is far more than it appears. What would you do if your home turned against you? Hit the like button and subscribe to join us as we unravel the mysteries of this cursed house. Their dream had just begun to curdle into something darker. That night, as shadows deepened and the house seemed to exhale around them, Lucas and Mariana found themselves slipping into a nightmare they couldn't wake from. The night begins uneventfully. The couple sits by the fireplace, trying to brush off the strange occurrences of the day. The warmth of the fire flickers against the wooden walls, casting long shadows that dance like figures in a silent performance. Lucas reassures Mariana, it's just an old house. Every creak and groan has a perfectly logical explanation. But even as he speaks, his eyes dart to the darkened corners of the room, as though expecting to see something emerge. When they head to bed, the house falls into an eerie stillness. Mariana drifts off quickly, but Lucas lies awake, staring at the ceiling. The faint sound of something scratching against the walls pulls his attention. It's almost rhythmic, like nails scraping wood in deliberate intervals. He rises cautiously, his bare feet pressing against the icy floorboards, and listens more intently. The sound stops abruptly, leaving only the silence. He convinces himself it's a raccoon or some other animal, and climbs back into bed. Hours later, Mariana wakes suddenly, her chest tight as though something heavy is pressing down on her. The room is pitch black, save for the faint, silvery glow of moonlight streaming through the window. Her breath fogs in the air. It's freezing, far colder than it should be. As her eyes adjust to the dark, she notices something wrong with the bedroom door. It's slightly ajar, even though she distinctly remembers locking it. She nudges Lucas awake, her voice trembling. "Lucas, did you hear that?" He groans, half asleep, but as his consciousness sharpens, he too feels the oppressive cold. He gets out of bed, grabbing his phone to use as a flashlight. The beam cuts through the darkness, but the light seems muted, as though the air itself is absorbing it. "Stay here," he whispers, his voice betraying his own fear. Mariana watches him disappear into the hallway. She feels exposed, vulnerable, as though unseen eyes are fixed on her every movement. The scratching sound starts again, louder now, and she instinctively pulls the blanket over her head, as if it could shield her from the growing terror. Lucas follows the sound down the hallway, his flashlight trembling in his hands. The house feels different, like it has expanded, the corridor stretching longer than it had been that day. At the end of the hallway, he notices something peculiar, a door he's certain wasn't there before. His instincts scream at him to turn back, but curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pulls him forward. As he reaches for the doorknob, it swings open on its own with a creak that echoes unnaturally loud. Inside, the air feels heavier, almost alive. The beam of his flashlight reveals a small, windowless room. The walls are covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the wood, their edges glowing faintly as if pulsing with life. In the center of the room lies an object covered in cloth. The fabric ripples slightly, as though something beneath it is breathing. Meanwhile, back in the bedroom, Mariana's fear escalates. The cold intensifies, and the scratching becomes relentless, now coming from the walls, the ceiling, even under the bed. She can't stand it anymore and calls out, "Lucas, where are you?" But her voice feels swallowed by the house, as though it refuses to let her words reach him. Lucas, unable to resist, reaches for the cloth. The moment his fingers graze it, a deafening noise fills the room, like the wail of 1,000 voices crying out in anguish. The symbols on the walls flare brightly, then dim, leaving him in complete darkness. When he turns to leave, the door slams shut behind him, and the flashlight flickers out. At the same moment, Mariana's blanket is ripped from her hands. She screams, scrambling to the far corner of the bed as she stares into the darkness. For a fleeting second, she sees it, a tall, shadowy figure standing in the doorway, its form too still, too deliberate. Then it's gone. What would you do if your safe haven turned into a prison of nightmares? Stay with us to uncover the chilling secrets of the house that won't let go. As the house tightened its grip, Lucas and Mariana began to understand that their reality was unraveling. The walls, the doors, the very air inside, it all seemed to pulsate with a dark intent, as if the house itself were alive and watching. Lucas's night trapped in the strange room leaves him shaken. When he finally manages to pry the door open, he stumbles back into the hallway, but it's not the same hallway he entered. The once familiar corridor has transformed. The wooden walls are warped, bending inward as though trying to swallow him. The air smells acrid, like burnt hair, and the faint sound of whispers follows him, growing louder with every step. They aren't ordinary whispers. They're layered, overlapping voices, some pleading, others laughing cruelly. Back in the bedroom, Mariana is frozen with fear. She hasn't seen the shadowy figure since it appeared in the doorway, but its presence lingers in the oppressive cold that fills the room. Her breath fogs in front of her as she calls out for Lucas again, her voice trembling. Suddenly, the mirror above the dresser catches her eye. At first, it's her reflection, pale, terrified, but then it shifts. Behind her, in the reflection, she sees the shadow again. It's closer now, standing just behind her shoulder. She spins around, her heart pounding, but the room is empty. When she looks back at the mirror, it's cracked. Each fracture seems deliberate, forming a pattern, an eye staring back at her. She backs away, her pulse racing, and nearly trips over the edge of the bed. Lucas finally bursts into the room, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Something's wrong with this place," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. Mariana nods, too afraid to speak. Together, they decide to leave immediately. They rush to the front door, but when Lucas throws it open, they're not met with the cool mountain air. They're met with the same hallway they just left. It's as though the house has shifted, looping in on itself like a twisted labyrinth. Lucas tries another door, and another, but each one leads to the same hallway. Mariana begins to panic, her breathing shallow and erratic. Then they notice the walls. They're no longer solid wood but seem to ripple, as if made of liquid. Faces press against the surface, distorted, screaming faces that melt back into the walls before they can fully form. Lucas grabs Mariana's hand and pulls her down the hallway, desperate to find an escape. As they run, the house seems to come alive around them. Doors slam shut on their own, the floor creaks under invisible footsteps, and the temperature plummets. A door at the end of the hallway swings open violently, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. It wasn't there before. The couple hesitates, but a loud bang from behind them sends them rushing down the stairs, the shadows around them stretching and twisting unnaturally. The basement is worse than they imagined. The air is damp and heavy, carrying the metallic scent of blood. In the faint light of Lucas's phone, they see strange carvings on the walls, symbols that seem to pulse, glowing faintly. The ground is uneven, covered in dirt and what looks like old, rotting wood. Mariana's foot slips on something, and when she looks down, she realizes it's a bone. In the center of the basement stands an object covered by a heavy black cloth. They approach it cautiously, the tension between them palpable. Lucas hesitates, his hand trembling as he reaches for the cloth. But before he can pull it away, the whispers return, louder and more insistent. They seem to be coming from the walls themselves, chanting in a language neither of them recognizes. Mariana grabs Lucas's arm. "We need to leave. Now." But as they turn to go back up the stairs, they're gone, replaced by a solid wall. Panic sets in as they realize they're trapped. The whispers rise to a crescendo, and the black cloth begins to move, as though something beneath it is alive. The tension peaks as the object beneath the cloth is revealed, not by Lucas, but by an unseen force. The cloth slides off, and what lies beneath is impossible to comprehend. A grotesque amalgamation of flesh and shadow, its form shifting constantly, eyes blinking open and shut across its surface. It emits a low, guttural growl that reverberates through the basement. Lucas and Mariana are paralyzed with fear as the thing seems to regard them, its shifting eyes locking onto theirs. The walls around them begin to close in, the symbols glowing brighter. The house is no longer just alive, it's hungry. But where does it lead? To freedom, or deeper into the nightmare? Keep watching to uncover the horrifying secrets of the house that refuses to let go. The walls of the house seem to pulsate, alive with some ancient, malevolent force. Lucas and Mariana had thought they'd reached the peak of their terror, but the house was only beginning to reveal its true nature. The door in the basement creaks open slowly, revealing a corridor shrouded in darkness. It's impossibly long, stretching far beyond the dimensions of the house they'd entered. A faint light flickers at the end, but its source is obscured by the shadows writhing along the walls. Lucas grips Mariana's hand tightly as they step forward, their breaths shallow and quick, the cold air biting at their skin. Each step they take seems to echo unnaturally, as if the sound is being devoured and spit back at them in warped intervals. The corridor grows narrower, the walls closing in, until they're forced to walk single file. The flickering light ahead pulses like a heartbeat, steady and unnerving. Mariana whispers, "This can't be real," but Lucas doesn't respond. He's too focused on the light, drawn to it despite the growing dread curling in his chest. As they approach, the source of the light becomes clearer, a large, ornate mirror framed in black and silver, its surface rippling like water. Lucas steps closer, his reflection distorting into a grotesque, nightmarish version of himself. His eyes are hollow, his face stretched into an eternal scream. He stumbles back, but the reflection doesn't vanish. Instead, it moves on its own, raising a hand to point at Mariana. She gasps, backing away, but the walls behind her have shifted again, cutting off any retreat. The mirror begins to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrates through their bones. Mariana's reflection emerges from the glass, stepping into the corridor. It's her, but not her. Its eyes are dark voids, its smile twisted and unnatural. Lucas grabs a broken piece of wood from the ground, holding it defensively. "Stay back," he shouts, but the reflection tilts its head, mocking him. It whispers in a voice that is Mariana's, but layered with something deeper, colder. "You can't fight this. You belong to us now." The reflections begin to multiply, spilling out of the mirror like water flooding the corridor. They're everywhere, on the walls, the floor, even the ceiling, closing in with each passing second. Lucas and Mariana are surrounded, the air thick with whispers and guttural laughter. Desperate, Lucas swings the piece of wood at the mirror, shattering it into countless shards. The moment the glass breaks, a deafening scream fills the air, and the reflections vanish. But the relief is short-lived. The ground beneath them begins to tremble, and the walls split open, revealing a swirling void of black and red. Mariana clings to Lucas as the floor gives way, plunging them into the abyss. They fall for what feels like an eternity, their screams lost in the deafening roar of the void. When they finally land, it's not on solid ground, but on something soft and pulsating. The space around them is a grotesque cavern, its walls made of flesh and sinew, glowing faintly with the same symbols they'd seen in the basement. In the center of the cavern stands a figure cloaked in shadows. It's tall and imposing, its presence suffocating. The figure extends a hand, and a voice echoes through the chamber, not spoken but felt, reverberating in their very souls. You have trespassed where you do not belong. One of you must stay, or both will be consumed. Lucas and Mariana exchange a terrified glance, the weight of the decision crushing them. The figure points to Mariana, and Lucas immediately steps forward. "Take me instead," he shouts, his voice trembling but resolute. The figure pauses, its shadowy head tilting as if considering his offer. Before Lucas can react, the ground beneath Mariana opens, and tendrils of darkness pull her down. She screams his name, her voice fading as the void swallows her whole. Lucas collapses, broken, as the figure retreats into the shadows. But then silence. The cavern dissolves, and Lucas finds himself back in the house, standing alone in the now empty living room. The house is quiet, eerily so, as if nothing had ever happened. But when he looks into a nearby mirror, Mariana's face stares back at him, her eyes filled with terror, silently begging for help. What would you sacrifice to escape the inescapable? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to uncover more chilling tales like this one. The house had taken something precious, but its hunger wasn't yet satisfied. For Lucas, the nightmare wasn't over. It had only changed shape, blending with the fragile fabric of reality. Lucas stumbles out of the cavern, back into the living room, his breath ragged and his mind reeling. The house looks untouched, eerily normal, as though nothing had happened. But it feels wrong. The oppressive silence that had once filled the air is replaced by a low, almost imperceptible hum. The house is no longer watching, it's waiting. Mariana is gone, her screams still echoing in his head. Lucas collapses onto the floor, trembling. "This isn't real," he whispers to himself, gripping his hair as if trying to anchor his sanity. But when he looks up, his reflection in the large mirror above the fireplace catches his eye. It's not his reflection at all, it's Mariana. Her face is pale, her eyes wide with terror, and her lips move, but no sound comes out. "Mariana," he whispers, crawling toward the mirror. Her expression grows frantic, and she pounds on the glass from the other side. Her mouth forms the words "help me," over and over, but no matter how hard Lucas tries, he can't hear her. Suddenly, a dark figure appears behind her reflection. Its shadowy hands grip her shoulders and yank her out of view. The glass ripples like water, and her image disappears, leaving only Lucas staring back at himself. He scrambles to his feet, desperate to understand what's happening. Searching for answers, he remembers the symbols carved into the walls of the basement. "There has to be a way to bring her back," he mutters, his voice trembling. Determined, he descends into the basement again. The carvings are still there, glowing faintly, but now they pulse in time with the house's low hum. Among the strange symbols, Lucas notices something he missed before: drawings of people trapped inside mirrors. Some of the figures are alone, screaming silently, while others seem to be pulled into the void by shadowy hands. At the center of the carvings is an inscription in a language he doesn't understand, but beneath it, someone has scrawled a chilling message. "Once they take you, you become part of the house." Lucas feels the walls close in, the air growing heavier. He clutches a shard of the broken mirror he had shattered earlier, holding it up to the carvings. For a moment, nothing happens, but then the shard begins to vibrate, and faint whispers emerge from it. They're Mariana's whispers, distant and desperate. Driven by desperation, Lucas uses the shard to carve into the symbols on the wall, hoping to break whatever spell binds Mariana. As the shard cuts into the wood, the house reacts violently. The ground shakes, and the symbols flare with a blinding light. The whispers turn to screams, and Lucas hears Mariana's voice, clearer now. "Stop. You're making it worse." He hesitates, his heart pounding. The room feels alive, the walls pulsating like a living organism. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he notices a figure standing in the shadows. It's Mariana, but not her. Her face is pale and lifeless, her eyes black voids. She steps forward, her movements jerky and unnatural. "Lucas," she says, her voice hollow, layered with an unsettling echo. "You can't save me. You can only join me." Her figure flickers like a faulty projection, and he realizes it's not really her. It's the house, using her image to manipulate him. He backs away, clutching the shard like a weapon. "You're lying," he says, his voice shaking. "I know she's still alive." The false Mariana tilts her head, her lips curling into a twisted smile. "Alive? Or just part of me now?" Suddenly, the mirror shard in Lucas's hand begins to glow, burning his skin. He drops it with a cry, and the light from the shard spreads across the basement like a web, illuminating more carvings and symbols that weren't visible before. The walls seem to shift, revealing hidden alcoves filled with objects, personal belongings of past victims. He sees old photographs, broken watches, and torn clothing, each item radiating an aura of despair. Among the objects, Lucas finds something familiar, Mariana's necklace. The sight of it nearly breaks him, but it also strengthens his resolve. He knows she's still in the house, somewhere, and he refuses to leave without her. The glowing symbols on the walls begin to converge, forming a large, circular portal in the center of the room. From the swirling darkness inside, Lucas hears Mariana's voice again, faint but unmistakable. "Lucas, please." He steps toward the portal, his fear warring with his determination. The shadows around the portal writhe, as though alive, and the air is filled with a deafening hum. He knows that crossing through might mean losing himself entirely, but staying behind means abandoning her forever. What would you do to save the one you love? Would you risk losing yourself? Leave your theories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to uncover what happens next. Lucas knew he was crossing a boundary no one was meant to. The portal wasn't just a doorway, it was a gaping wound in reality, and every fiber of his being screamed at him to turn back. But Mariana's voice echoed from the void, pulling him forward, deeper into the darkness. The moment Lucas steps through the portal, the world shifts violently. The air is thick, oppressive, carrying a metallic tang that clings to his throat. The ground beneath him isn't solid, it feels spongy, alive, pulsating in a sickening rhythm. Shadows swirl around him, not random but deliberate, as though they are watching, judging. The portal behind him snaps shut with a thunderous crack, plunging him into complete darkness. For a moment, all he can hear is his own labored breathing. Then, faint whispers begin to rise, echoing from every direction. They aren't just voices, they're accusations, taunts, fragments of Mariana's pleas for help twisted into cruel, mocking tones. "You left her," one voice hisses. "She's ours now," another growls. Lucas stumbles forward, his flashlight flickering as though struggling to pierce the unnatural gloom. The path ahead is labyrinthine, the walls shifting and reshaping themselves like living things. They're made of something unnatural, a mix of stone, flesh, and something unidentifiable that seems to ripple under his touch. Lucas presses forward, his pulse pounding in his ears. The whispers grow louder, forming a cacophony that makes it hard to think. He's not alone here. Suddenly, the ground beneath him gives way, and he tumbles into a vast chamber. The fall knocks the air from his lungs, and he gasps as he struggles to his feet. The chamber is massive, lit by an eerie, pulsating light that emanates from a massive, organic structure in the center. It looks like a heart, grotesque and alien, its surface slick and pulsating with every beat. Around it, shadowy figures move in the periphery, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. Lucas takes a cautious step forward, and the figures freeze, turning toward him in unison. Their faces are obscured, but their eyes, if they can be called eyes, burn with an unnatural, piercing glow. They don't move closer, but their presence is suffocating, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. Then he hears it, Mariana's voice clearer now. "Lucas, help me." It's coming from the grotesque structure. He approaches it, his legs trembling, and sees something that makes his stomach drop. Within the pulsating mass, he can make out faint outlines of faces, distorted and screaming silently. Mariana's face is among them, her expression frozen in terror. "Mariana!" he shouts, his voice cracking. He reaches out, but the surface of the structure repels him with a force that sends him stumbling back. The shadowy figures begin to close in, their movements slow but deliberate. Lucas looks around desperately, his mind racing for a way to free her. His flashlight flickers again, and he notices carvings etched into the floor around the heart-like structure. They're the same symbols he saw in the basement, but more intricate, more alive. He realizes they're not just decorations, they're a language, a spell. Lucas scrambles to trace the symbols with his hand, but as he does, the shadows lunge toward him. One of the figures grabs his arm, and an icy pain shoots through his body, paralyzing him. Its touch feels like death itself, draining the warmth and life from him. Lucas fights against the overwhelming despair creeping into his mind, using every ounce of willpower to push the figure away. "I won't leave her," he screams, his voice echoing through the chamber. Summoning a strength he didn't know he had, he forces himself to carve the final symbol into the floor. The chamber shudders violently, the pulsating heart glowing brighter and emitting a deep, guttural roar. The shadowy figures recoil, their forms dissolving into the darkness. The heart begins to split open, revealing a blinding light inside. From the light, Lucas sees Mariana, her form translucent and fragile. She reaches out to him, her face a mix of hope and fear. But as Lucas steps closer, the light begins to dim, and a voice fills the chamber, deep, resonant, and filled with malice. "You cannot take what belongs to me," it booms. The ground beneath Lucas begins to crack, tendrils of shadow emerging and wrapping around his legs. He struggles, reaching out for Mariana, their fingertips just inches apart. "Lucas, don't," she cries, tears streaming down her face. It's too late, but Lucas refuses to let go. With a final, desperate surge, he grabs her hand. The light envelopes them both, and the chamber explodes into chaos. When Lucas opens his eyes, he's back in the living room of the house. Mariana lies unconscious beside him, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He shakes her gently, tears streaming down his face. "Mariana, wake up. Please." Her eyes flutter open, and for a moment, relief washes over him. But then her expression changes, her eyes filled with fear as she whispers, "Lucas, we're not alone. Would you risk everything for the one you love, knowing the nightmare might never end?" Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter in this terrifying journey. Lucas and Mariana had escaped the shadows, at least they thought they had. But the house wasn't finished with them. It had only begun its game, and the final move was yet to come. Lucas holds Mariana close, the fear in her trembling hands matching the icy dread clawing at his chest. The mirror on the wall reflects the room perfectly, but the dark figure within it is unmistakable. It doesn't move like a shadow, it moves deliberately, pacing the confines of its glass prison, its hollow eyes locked on Lucas. He turns away from the mirror, pulling Mariana to her feet. "We're leaving," he whispers, though the words feel hollow. They make their way toward the front door, their steps hesitant, the silence of the house oppressive. The door creaks open with an agonizing slowness, revealing the dense forest outside. Lucas grips Mariana's hand tightly as they step out onto the porch. The air feels heavy, like walking through water. Every sound, the crunch of their footsteps, the rustling of leaves, is distorted, warped, as if the house is twisting reality around them. Just as they reach the edge of the clearing, Lucas stops abruptly. His heart sinks as he turns back to look at the house. There, standing in the doorway, is Mariana. Another Mariana. She's identical, down to the tear-streaked face and the way her lips tremble as she whispers, "Lucas, help me." He freezes, unable to process what he's seeing. The Mariana beside him tightens her grip on his hand. "Don't listen to it," she pleads, her voice frantic. "It's not me." But the Mariana in the doorway steps forward, her face etched with desperation. "Please, Lucas. It's lying. I'm the real one." Her voice is cracked, raw, as if she's been screaming for hours. Lucas's mind races. He looks between them, his breath quickening. Both are so convincing, so real. The forest around them begins to twist, the trees bending and stretching unnaturally, their branches clawing at the sky. The whispers return, faint at first, then louder, rising to a cacophony. "Choose," the voices demand. "One of them must stay." The Mariana beside him tugs at his arm. "Lucas, please," she begs, tears streaming down her face. "We have to leave. Now." But the Mariana in the doorway falls to her knees, her sobs echoing through the clearing. "Lucas, it's me. Don't leave me here." The ground beneath them begins to crack, thin tendrils of darkness slithering upward, snaking around their feet. The house groans, its very foundation trembling, as if it's alive and furious. Lucas drops to his knees, clutching his head, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and doubt. He makes his choice. He turns to the Mariana beside him and says, "If it's really you, prove it." Her eyes widen, her expression shifting to something unreadable. But before she can respond, the Mariana in the doorway screams, a guttural, agonized sound that pierces the air. The tendrils of darkness surge toward Lucas, wrapping around his legs and pulling him toward the house. He claws at the ground, but it crumbles beneath his fingers. The Mariana beside him suddenly stands, her face no longer desperate but cold, expressionless. She steps back, her form flickering like a bad signal. "You should have chosen me," she says, her voice hollow. Lucas screams as he's dragged back into the house. The door slams shut behind him, plunging the room into darkness. He's back in the living room, but it's different now. The walls are alive, shifting and breathing, the air thick with a suffocating heat. The dark figure from the mirror steps out, its form towering over him. "Did you really think you could leave?" The figure growls, its voice layered with 100 others. "This is where you belong. You were always meant to be here." Lucas stares at the figure, his terror giving way to rage. "Where is Mariana?" he demands, his voice cracking. The figure tilts its head, and for the first time, Lucas sees its face. It's his face, twisted, distorted, but undeniably his. Mariana is gone, it says, its lips curling into a cruel smile. And soon you will be too. In a final act of defiance, Lucas lunges at the figure, but his hands pass through it as if it's made of smoke. The room collapses around him, the walls folding inward, the ceiling crashing down, but he feels no impact. Instead, he finds himself standing in front of the mirror again. This time he's inside it. He pounds on the glass, screaming, but no sound comes out. On the other side, he sees Mariana, her face pale and empty as she stares at the mirror. She doesn't see him. She doesn't even seem to recognize the reflection staring back at her. Would you trust your instincts, or would the house break you too? Comment your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for the final chapter in this haunting tale. The house was silent now, its secrets buried deep within its walls. Yet, its story was far from over. Some places aren't meant to be understood, only feared. And some souls are never truly free. Mariana sits alone in the living room, her hands trembling as she stares at the faint cracks in the mirror. The air feels heavier, colder, even though the fire in the hearth burns brightly. She should feel safe, but the weight of the house presses on her chest, an invisible hand gripping her every breath. Her reflection stares back at her, hollow-eyed and unnervingly still. "Lucas," she whispers, her voice breaking. She knows he's gone, but she can't shake the feeling that he's still here, somewhere in the house. The walls seem to shift ever so slightly, their wooden panels groaning softly, like the exhale of something immense and alive. She forces herself to look away from the mirror, but even in her peripheral vision, she swears she sees her reflection moving when she doesn't. Desperate for answers, Mariana grabs a flashlight and ventures upstairs, the steps creaking beneath her weight. Every corner of the house feels darker now, the shadows denser, as if they're watching her. At the end of the hallway, she finds the door to the master bedroom slightly ajar, a faint light flickering from within. Her heartbeat quickens as she pushes the door open. Inside, the room is empty, except for the mirror from earlier. It now stands in the center of the room, its surface impossibly clean and polished, reflecting every detail of the space around it. But the room in the reflection isn't the same. It's twisted, distorted, as if viewed through a warped lens. She approaches cautiously, her breath fogging up the glass. As she gets closer, she notices something chilling. In the reflection, Lucas is standing behind her. His face is pale, his eyes wide with fear. He mouths something she can't hear, his hands pressed against the glass as if trying to reach her. "Lucas," she gasps, spinning around. But there's nothing there. She turns back to the mirror, and his reflection is gone. In its place, the room behind her begins to change. The walls in the mirror shift and bleed, their surfaces melting into grotesque, writhing shapes. Shadowy figures emerge, their forms barely human, their mouths open in silent screams. Mariana stumbles back, her flashlight flickering. The mirror begins to hum, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through her chest. She wants to run, but her feet won't move. The reflection in the mirror grows darker, the shadowy figures multiplying until they fill the entire surface. Then one of them steps out. It's Lucas, or what's left of him. His face is gaunt, his skin gray, his eyes dark voids. His body moves stiffly, unnaturally, as though being controlled by something else. "Mariana," he whispers, his voice hollow and distorted. "You have to leave. It won't stop until it has you too." She shakes her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't leave you." Lucas steps closer, his form flickering like a dying light. "This house, it's not just alive. It's hungry. If you stay, it will consume you like it did me." Before she can respond, the mirror behind him begins to crack. The sound is deafening, like thunder reverberating through the room. The cracks spread rapidly, and the shadowy figures inside start clawing at the glass, trying to break through. Lucas grabs her shoulders, his touch cold and foreign. "Go now," he shouts, his voice rising in desperation. Mariana stumbles out of the room, the sound of shattering glass echoing behind her. She runs down the hallway, her footsteps pounding against the wooden floor. The walls around her twist and writhe, faces pressing against the surface, their mouths opening in silent cries. The house itself seems to be coming alive, its structure groaning and shifting as if trying to trap her inside. She bursts through the front door, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. She doesn't stop running until she reaches the edge of the forest, her legs burning, her lungs gasping for air. When she finally turns back, the house is gone. For a moment, there's only silence. Then, faintly, she hears Lucas's voice. "Mariana," it's coming from a small hand mirror in her pocket. the one she'd found in the basement. She pulls it out, her hands shaking. In its surface, she sees his face, distorted and desperate. "Don't let it take you too," he pleads, his voice barely audible. "Would you risk everything to uncover the truth? Or would you run, knowing some secrets are better left buried?" Comment your theories below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that will haunt your dreams.